Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transparency and Tech track. I'm really excited to be here and present this session, and I would like to start by welcoming my panelists. Are you all here in the chat? Okay, super. I can see everyone's here, so I would be great if the producer could let everybody in so we can get started. Fantastic. I guess we're just waiting on Anna, but hopefully she will join soon. So yes, finally, welcome everybody for real to the Transparency and Tech track. And this track is going to be all about what is the importance of building transparent technology? Why do we do it? How do we do it properly? And what are some leading examples that we can look at as inspiration for when we build our technology? So I'd like to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and what they do. We have some amazing women here working on transparency and tech. And maybe we can start with you, Miri, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, thanks. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm calling from Espoo, Finland. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company named Sidot. We started 2.5 years ago. Really, we're building a technology platform to help enterprises and startups, public authorities to put in place AI governance and also to communicate about their AI systems transparently to different kinds of stakeholder groups. So that might be citizens or consumers, auditors, regulators, investors, all of them. So great to be here.
Great. And Clara, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Planeton?
Yes, of course. Happy to be here, and hi, everyone. I'm Clara, CEO at Planeton, and Planeton is an R&D company working with providing a platform for learning and ecosystem services and cross collaborations. And our mission is to make a planet positive future possible. And mainly here today, I'm here for the sake of Pacers, which is one of our initiatives on this platform.
Thank you so much. And finally, we will leave it to Malin. Can you introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, and super nice to be able to talk to everyone out there. So my name is Malin, and I'm the COO and CMO of newsvoice.com. And at Newsvoice, we're sort of on the mission to fix the news. And what we do is we aggregate major news sites around the world, international as well as independent media. And then to every news story, we always show multiple perspectives, and we also crowdsource the news together with our community to be able to make you actually trust what you read. So that's a bit about what we do at Newsvoice.
So one thing that is sticking out to me about this panel and why I invited you all is that we are all here from the Nordic countries, who are also the highest trust countries. And I think that speaks to why all of you have kind of built transparency into your platforms as kind of a fundamental aspect. But I'd like to ask all of you, why do you think transparency is important? What purpose does it serve for society? Maybe we can start with you, Miri.
Yeah, you're right that probably as a Nordic citizen, you expect a lot of transparency, or that's very natural solution to these questions. It was very quickly when we started to think about what are the ways how we help large organizations to operational AI ethics principles that many have committed into, and transparency came up very soon. And I think it's partially I've been thinking this that way, that it's sort of foundational because it enables also a lot of other things. So for example, accountability, it's really hard to be accountable of something that you don't know. So we need transparency to serve that purpose, that people who should take responsibility over these systems, they need to know and understand better what they're responsible for. So that's really one important. Obviously, I'm working very much with public sector clients as well. We have been working with cities of Amsterdam and Helsinki, for example, who have been very open regarding their algorithms. So obviously, I believe it's a really core part of overall democratic societies, information openness, and having enough information so that people can protect also their rights in relation to these systems and how public authorities is used. So yeah, it's so fundamental in that sense that it enables so many different aspects.
You touched on something, which is that Finland in the public sector is actually leading a bit because they have these kind of public AI registries. Do you want to discuss a little bit about that? Welcome, Anna.
Happy to. Hi, Anna. Yeah, so that's something that we have been working very intensively with Helsinki and actually Amsterdam as well. So not only Nordic things. So I'm looking at whole Europe on this one. But obviously, so proud to have our home capital as well on board. So the idea of the public AI register is really to bring the transparency available for citizens. So you can find this by Googling AI register in Helsinki or going to ai.hel.fi address, and there you can see basically the algorithms or AI systems that the city is using. It's not only that, because underlying there is this systematic approach. What is the transparency? What information we need to have in place for all of those systems? So it's first of all, it's governance tool for cities and these organizations who are taking it into use to systematically go through and manage and document certain aspects of their algorithmic systems, and then publish that information for citizens, anyone who is interested on the AI use in the city. And then obviously that's not the end, but it's also a means to get feedback and participation from people who will take a look and read those registers or the information in the register. They have a possibility to provide feedback, and that's sort of crowdsourcing feedback and identification also of possible problems and taking it further.
So actually, this is a good time for Anna. Thank you for joining us. And maybe you could also briefly introduce yourself and the work you're doing, which in some ways intersects with the public sector as well.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I was a bit late. Well, my name is Anna, and I am the CEO of a company called NetClean. We are developing technologies to detect child sexual abuse material in corporate environments. So what our solutions are doing is that they find if someone is using the corporate computer or the mobile device to consume child sexual abuse material. We do engage a lot with the public sector because they are big employers, as you know, and we know that findings in our systems show that 1 in 500 computers are used to consume child sexual abuse material in a corporate environment, and we use, when we detect child sexual abuse material, we use known material as a base. So our solutions works like a virus detection solution. We get feedback on hashes or images that have a digital fingerprint that law enforcement is classifying. So we have a collaboration with law enforcement when we detect material.
I think there's kind of an interesting dichotomy when it comes to transparency in the public sector, because of course, when they are transparent, that means that when they make mistakes and when there are issues, those will also be public, which many could see as being kind of a negative for the public sector, because in some ways, seeing mistakes can diminish trust. I know that, Clara, you have also worked with the Planathon project, trying to make sure that people get the correct facts And these are things that can maybe change over time, and that can maybe be confusing for people if they see this kind of disconnect in something that they thought was correct then being changed or edited or looking incorrect. How do you think it's a good for a technology company to kind of handle that?
Again, can you repeat the question?
So we talked a little bit about this. A lot of you are working with the public sector, but of course there's a dichotomy when it comes to the public sector being transparent if there is something that is maybe negative, or maybe there's something that's changing that makes people think that, you know, a fact that was once correct is no longer correct, for example, can maybe seem like fake news.
Yeah.
So kind of you need to build transparency in a way that is also not confusing to people and also is forgiving when mistakes are made.
Yeah. If I start with what we believe is a trustful source, we always have our foundation in science, backed by scientific research, and always in close collaboration with the scientists. And just to say something also about the purpose with Pacers, to understand that project and what's it for, it's towards influencers, strengthening them and enabling them to be the bearers of informed hope towards their followers. So we see them as the like today's and tomorrow's distributors of the truth, coming and backed from science, the science source, when it comes to social ecological science, because we're on this mission of planet positivity. So this is really for the influencers that want and have the will and power to influence and inspire action. And there are a lot of critique around influencers, but we are deciding and willing to, like, okay, instead, how can we strengthen them by providing them with science and help them to be the informed hope bearers and storytellers.
So I think this is also something that touches on Malin, the work that you do with the News Voice, and what is a trusted source, and how do you promote trusted sources to the right people? When you're building your company and working with something like News Voice, how is it that you try to guide people towards the right trusted sources, and how do you decide what's a trusted source?
So just to give you some background on how we sort of create the news. So we sort of provide news summaries, which means like a short summary, and that should only sort of include the fact around the story. So it shouldn't be like an angle or a political angle towards a specific leaning. And we always want to sort of showcase different perspectives of a story. So it can be different sort of sources connected to different, like a center, a news center site, or like a right news site, or etc. So we never sort of publish a story if you can't sort of provide two different perspectives to it. And that's also sort of a way for us to showcase or sort of stay away from fake news. But I mean, it is very complicated. I mean, it's not like that we have like a final sort of answer, or that we sort of this is the way forward. But we always sort of try to basically that's the process. I mean, obviously it can't be sources like a Breitbart we don't include, but we try to, for example, showcase as many different perspectives as possible.
One thing that you have discussed working on is how you kind of brand transparency. Is it useful as a brand? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Hyper Island.
Yeah, we discussed that previously, actually, with sort of what you can in some cases called washing, and then if you sort of just trying to wash something to sort of make your brand look good, but it's not really connected to what you do or sort of the core of your business. But we just did a project together with the Hyper Island students, where we looked at so what's important for Gen Zs and millennials when it comes to sort of the news of the future. And they identified 3 different things. And one was like transparency, and one was like a transparent process. So it's like, okay, how do I know what this information, what's backing this information that I'm reading? and they also wanted to see sort of different sources. But I think the main thing for them is they're sort of just so fed up with sort of this fake world, and they just want to have sort of the fact clear from the beginning. And for us, obviously, that's sort of very much in line in what we're building and what we're doing. But I think just the fact that they want to be able to sort of see and get a sense of the process. Which is obviously, I think, super important. And when it comes to like brand building, I think a lot of companies nowadays, they talk about like transparency. It's very sort of much a buzzword, I would say, nowadays. But I think it needs to be connected to the sort of the core of your business and the business strategy. It can't just be something that you sort of put out there like, yeah, we're working with transparency. It needs to be, I mean, especially I think a younger audience, I mean, they're way too smart. So it needs to be sort of connected to the truth and to what you're building, and the core of your business strategy, I think.
So it's interesting what we've talked about. Transparency is now good for business, and you talked about maybe what we can call transparency washing, where they're saying they're transparent, but they're not really walking the walk. So when it comes to something like greenwashing, for example, we try to connect companies to standards of what is actually sustainable. Do you think there's a role for, and this is a question for all of you, is there a role for civil society in making transparency standards, and what would a good standard be?
Can I comment on that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely need those, because like it will be very difficult to read those transparency disclosures if they are different for every single organization. I also feel it's like super inefficient for an organization, like every organization, to come up with different or like their own understanding what is transparency and so forth. So that's something that we have sort of really focused on suggesting a common way of how to define transparency. I think very, and I fully agree with what Malin just raised regarding this walking to the talk on transparency. I haven't seen that much transparency washing, like ethics washing in general, yes, and in this space. But overall, I think that the pressure from many directions is towards this very operational disclosures. Also, I think one great opportunity and what I think will be a major force for good impact in this area is the whole impact investment and ESG investing. And there are actually quite established standards on how to report. I think those need to be renewed in that sense that we need to have the direction towards more operational data also there. It cannot be enough that a company discloses something about their sustainability once a year. We need to have operational disclosures that are like at least monthly, if not like daily data about how they are doing. That's the only way to be able to actually combine the sustainability and the financial economical metrics of the company, and actually being able to see also how do these aspects contribute and correlate with the economic success of a company. A lot of work to do there, but there are also like good existing frameworks where to connect this information, and also a lot of standardization organizations, for example, are working in standardizing transparency as well. I'm involved in IEEE, for example, so there are standardization programs and projects going on in that space.
Absolutely. I would like to, since we have now talked about, is there a role for the public sector? I'd like to also ask all of you, what do you think is the role of the private sector when it comes to promoting transparency? Especially, Anna, for example, I mean, you're working with a technology where maybe people would like to understand how it works before they purchase it and what exactly it's doing with their systems. and maybe there's some fear around that. So what is the responsibility of private companies when it comes to building transparency into their software?
Well, I do think that private companies often take the lead. They have the muscle and the sort of financial muscle and the scale, and they are often a lot harder driven than the public sector when it comes to example for the SDGs and the ESG investing and stuff like that. They have a lot of requirements on them. I do think that they need to also drive their business in a more ethical way, in that sense that they cannot just work for profit anymore. They need to work for the planet and the people as well. I mean, when we are selling our software to private companies, they want to understand what we are detecting and how it works, because they don't want to interfere with their staffs or employees' integrity. But at the same time, they can be their own kings in their kingdom, if you know what I mean, within the legal boundaries. So I think that they have a huge role to play in order to set the agenda for transparency, but also for other things like working with environmental issues and stuff like that.
So do you believe that essentially private companies can nudge the public sector into basically promoting transparency as a public good, or this is something that private companies, they're taking a lead in the Nordics, but is this something that we should actually see worldwide? I mean, what are the standards that you think are something that, how do I phrase this question? What kind of transparency standards would you like to see private companies promoting outside of the Nordics?
Well, I would like to see them taking the Nordics as a model and then try to install it on other markets. And if you are a global company with headquarters in the Nordic, you're most likely have the same processes and the same way of working in the countries and region where you have business. So I think that what they need to do is they need to raise their voice in those countries where transparency and other issues are not so highly talked about.
So then again, I have a question for all of you, which is that, the Nordics are maybe leading when it comes to both the private and the public sector, as a lot of you have said, but where are we experiencing friction? Where are there issues with the transparency, and where is it maybe something that we need to work on?
I mean, I can touch base on that from sort of a more consumer perspective, because I mean, we're based here in Sweden, but 65% of our readers are actually in the US. So we sort of work towards the US market, and what we see, I mean, this is not a surprise, but just to put things in perspective, I mean, in the US, 41% of the population does not sort of trust media, which is, we all know, obviously a huge problem. And I mean, that sort of undermines, I mean, to be able to be sort of part of a democracy. So I think sort of, and the user or the reader, for example, when we speak to our users in the US, I mean, they believe this is a major problem, because I mean, they don't have trusted sources that they believe can make them sort of know what to vote for, or sort of actually believe what sort of goes on in the world. So I think for us, being a sort of company based out of Sweden but sort of work towards the American market, has been super useful, just because they're sort of a trust from sort of the American perspective towards the Nordics, that like, okay, based on your sort of history, it's actually been quite helpful for us. So that I think it's also something that users see as super important, to be able to sort of trust the company, or sort of purchase from a company, or be part of a company's community.
Do you think that part of the reason that a lot of your consumers of your product are outside of Sweden is it a lot of people that are already tech savvy? And how would you reach consumers that are maybe kind of wary about a foreign tech company that's claiming to be unbiased?
I mean, obviously, the users that we sort of have is quite a tech savvy user from the beginning. But I mean, I think it's been sort of helpful in our communication that we're sort of not a US-based company, and we're not sort of US company from sort of built in the US from scratch. So I think that's definitely been helpful for us. But obviously, we're just in the beginning of our journey. So I mean, it's very much sort of early adopters that we sort of communicate. So I guess it might change.
So I would actually like to extend this question to all of you, which is that one of the reasons that transparency is maybe a public good is because as tech is used more and more in decision-making tools, it's extremely important that people understand how the decisions come about. Especially, for example, we've seen in COVID-19, you know, companies that maybe make healthcare decisions that are based on artificial intelligence. And if people don't trust that company to begin with, they might have difficulty getting proper healthcare. So how do you feel, or what do you feel are good practices in terms of communicating with consumers how transparency in tech is and what it looks like?
I think this is something where we are really on the first early steps. Still, I think these public AI registers is one example. What I believe where the direction will be is that we will need to find good ways to provide transparency within the service experience. So embedded as part of the experience. That means explainability, but also if I need to know what is the this system that I'm using, who owns it, how can I contest the decisions and so forth. We need to have that information available in better ways than today privacy policies and typical privacy related information. So I think this is a totally its own area of design innovation that we will see and how to deliver transparency communication in a user-friendly, usable manner within the service experiences.
Maybe I can comment on that as well. Coming from the influencer's perspective, but as a reference in like how can we reach a broader scale of a consumer, I believe that if we can equip influencers, for instance, we can equip other people in the ecosystem as well. But to use them as a reference, if we can equip them with sources of truth coming from science, help having them with the skills to actually communicate towards their followers, they know how to meet them, take them into nuggets that is digestible enough to actually understand, and also building on Marlin's reference on Gen Z and millennials, that they are actually towards reaching towards social media channels rather than the news when it comes to trusted sources, and therefore how can we fuel the social media channels as well and create a culture among the trolls and harassments, but how can we create a new standard for transparency where we use transparency as a tool for trust and connections instead?
I can follow up on that. I think that what you said there, Clara, that transparency and trust go hand in hand. I mean, if you don't trust the company or if you don't trust the influencer in the first place, it doesn't matter how well you have written your transparency documents, because it doesn't matter what you say, but you don't trust them. So I believe for companies and both in private and public sector, they need to start to working on their trust and the brand trust. I think that is key for them, and they can do that by sort of show and tell, not just tell. They have to show it as well, what they are doing.
I think that when it comes to the private companies and the public companies, the main fear of transparency is that if there is a misstep, there is kind of this negative feedback loop that can then lead to a complete lack of trust and kind of undermine the purpose to begin with. Do you think there's any examples that have been very successful at dealing with this?
Well, I think that in the space where I work, when it comes to child sexual abuse and be associated to that problem, I think that there are a lot of negative press that companies and public sector organizations has lived because they don't have an idea of what's going on in their environment. I think that if you have policies and you have solutions that sort of make sure that the policies are lived, then you have done what you can, and you can show that. And then I think that the general public understand if there are things that sometimes go wrong, but at least you can show that you are doing something.
So in that sense, it can be a tool for actually change and conversation and mobilization, as long as you have a good way of discussing missteps and negative
I think so.
Concepts.
Yeah.
Do you all agree with that, or do you think that it can kind of lead to undermining public trust?
Maybe not answering the question exactly, but I'm having an example within Pacers where we have a lot of activists with strong values, and where we encourage to have true conversations or even difficult conversations, and where they need to practice the skill of transparency, because I see it as a skill. And where Oatly, for instance, the CEO of Oatly, Tony, we invited him for a conversation with these guys on the fact of them partnering up with Blackstone. And there, I think, like, the learnings from that is, like, we don't need to agree. We can agree that we disagree, but to start, like, the starting point to actually inviting as a business, as a company, and also meeting the pushbacks you can get from social media, for instance, if you're fearful of that as a company, to reach out, like, instead go by example, and invite and ask for help and say, hey, we are willing to listen to your comments and have a discussion around that. And I'm really grateful that we had that kind of discussion. It was a very fruitful discussion, and I think maybe a blind spot in the Swedish culture, at least, is maybe that we believe that we need to reach consensus all the time, but it's actually enough just to listen, to understand, and then as a business leader, lead by example by showing your vulnerability, which I also think lays in the word of transparency, that we don't have all the answers.
I think this is a really interesting point, that one of the ways that we see ourselves as exporting transparency is by leading by example. But you mentioned that also being in high trust countries with a lot of transparency, we might have some blind spots. Are there any other blind spots that you all on this panel are noticing that might make it difficult for us to export transparency?
Yeah, I think that we can be sometimes. I mean, we come from a society that is very open, and even if it's International Women's Day today, I mean, it's basically quite equal. And I think that if you try to force our way of having things into a society where we might not be as advanced as the Swedish society, I think that could be a mismatch. You have to understand the local culture in a way to actually be able to change it from inside, if that makes sense.
So when it comes to exporting transparency, another way that we could do that could be through, for example, a good design choice or something that makes the transparency easy to come across within your technology. You mentioned Oatly as an example of this. Are there any other Nordic examples that you see as something companies around the world could look up to? Maybe not. Just Oatly?
No, but I think there are more. I don't know if they're so public. I'm thinking all of the companies that we've been having in this PACES learning program. I think it's why I'm blank of examples right now is because I think also that we are in the early stage for companies and businesses to actually be transparent. It's like, what should we show our flaws? Should we share them? And I think it's a journey for them as well. But I think it starts with admitting that you're part of the problem as well as part of the solution. And then as soon as we've gotten the partners that we're working with into that mindset, things starts to flow when it comes to solutions and cross collaborations and such. Yeah,
I think it's really important when you talk about that, part of the reason that this is helpful is because having the right partners and having the right consumers who understand the product means that you can be successful through transparency. I'm interested, for example, Malin, or if any of you others have felt that there was a time in your company where you could have used more support from the public sector and what they could have done to help your business along in promoting transparency.
Good question. I need to think a bit. Just before that, I just want to touch on the thing that Clara just spoke about regarding like Oatly and sort of the process and sort of agreeing sometimes or not agreeing. I think we're sort of in the beginning of this. I mean, I think what Clara sort of talked about that's so important. I mean, just to be able to sort of showcase more of a transparency process, just to be able to invite different people with different sort of opinions or sort of different backgrounds or whatever it is. And that's sort of, I think, step one. I mean, what we sort of, I guess, need to work on going forward is sort of step two. And that's like, what do we do with that type of information then? I mean, even if we agree not to agree. I mean, if you sort of invite your consumer or sort of the public or your community to sort of be able to sort of be part of the process, what do you do with the information that you sort of receive from them? Because I think it can also be a bit of a backlash if you don't do anything at all with sort of making them be part of your sort of transparency journey as a company, and you don't really give anything back. So I think that's something that's super important to sort of think about going forward. For us, even if you're in the sort of public or in the private sector, I mean, if we use our community or society, I mean, we need to be able to sort of give back, not in like 10 years, I mean, quite soon, to be honest. And that's not really sort of touching on your question because we haven't really received any help from the public sector as of yet. But I mean, it's also a bit complicated since we're based in Sweden, but we don't really work with the Swedish or Nordic market as of yet. So maybe someone else is sort of better to sort of answer your question.
Well, you did touch on something before and earlier, which is that there is kind of a sea change now, and maybe we'll see more in the next 5 years in that companies are kind of taking consumers with them on their transparency journey. So this is really interesting in that you said it's really important they include consumers, maybe bring on feedback from all different types of people. Is that something that all of you have done with your own companies, or do you see other ways of bringing the consumers along your journey that are not exactly what Malin has done?
I don't know, is it exactly same or different, but I think that's one of the most powerful ways to govern any AI systems, any intelligent systems, to have the broad representation from the people who are influenced by these systems. So absolutely, we have been trying to find ways, and that's one of the areas where we are definitely paying most attention to, like how to build these different kinds of mechanisms and how to find good mechanisms to engage both civil society organizations and individuals who are like direct users of these systems, or it's sort of design thinking and design methodologies applied to AI space, but it requires a lot of transparency to be able to have meaningful discussions around that. In those cases where we have had throughout when developing these registers and involved different stakeholders and especially citizens in giving feedback on the different types of transparency. Those are absolutely important, and it also reveals the difficulty of transparency. So it's not just that way that, okay, let's just like put out a lot of information and that's fine. You will hear so many different opinions on what's the level of transparency that is wanted and appreciated. So we cannot even try to seek for one type of transparency. We need to really understand who are the users of this information. We need to embrace the fact that our regular citizen might have totally different level of transparency needs and wants, willingness to interact with that information compared to civil society organization or investigative journalists and so forth. So this is something that I became very clear see it as one key area to tackle, is really to find understand always who are the ones who need this transparency, and then case by case find good ways to provide that transparency. So we don't want this same privacy policy impact on this area that we will just start to write those like super long documents that no one reads. So I hope that this whole AI transparency will turn around into something different than those lengthy privacy documentations that we are having in the market at the moment.
I think everybody would be in agreement that we are not getting what we want out of tech transparency by having extremely lengthy documents on what we do with your data. We are coming to the end of our panel, so I'd like to actually ask all of you in closing, what is your advice for private companies when it comes to building transparency into their technology? What do you think is the best practices around this? And maybe we'll just start with Clara.
Yes, I would say invite stakeholders, unexpected consumers or not yet consumers and users, and join forces around the mission that you share, because then we will need transparency, and we will also solve a lot of things that we need to solve. With new business ideas and etc.
Yeah, very good point. Malin, do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. But also, I think it's important for the businesses to understand if transparency is really important for them. Maybe it's not, to be honest. And if it's important, sort of understand why it's important for sort of the core of your business, and actually sort of build sort of inside out instead of sort of try to build sort of from the outside and in. So I think that's sort of that's my main point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I agree with Clara there to involve the relevant stakeholders, and we are not building solutions for the general public. However, I do believe that it is important that if you are going to detect something in traffic or using technology, I think that you need to work with the sources that are with the right sources when it comes to, for us, we work with law enforcement, trusted sources. That's what I'm looking for. You have to work with trusted sources if you're going to detect in traffic.
My guide would be that, or guidance would be that start internally. So build that transparency within, like to your own organization. So those business owners who need to know how your systems work and who carry anyways the responsibility of those systems. So try it out in a systematic manner internally, collect that feedback from inside, and then start to expand from there. I trust that will be a very interesting process and revealing regarding your technology. Hopefully, also like raising a lot of new ideas for how to apply the technologies that you have.
Thank you so much. It's a lot of food for thought. And I'd like to again thank all of you for joining the panel with some extremely different approaches to transparency, even though we're all representing the Nordics. For all of you watching, I hope that you enjoyed the panel and the rest of the conference, and you can continue to ask questions to us here on the chat if you wish, and we will try to answer them. And I think from all of us, thank you so much, and we'll see you at the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye.